Yeah, thanks, Mona. Thanks, Kobus. All good. Just before we start, can I just, while I've got everyone's attention, I think one of the stories I'd really like to start off with is this week was a lot said about Kanan, Moody, and my comments post-game about Buffet. I think I'd just like to put it in context. This is the 9th week that Kanan's been on tour. 9th week staying in a hotel. 9th week not having the luxury of being at home. First time in his career as a 22-year-old that he's been away from home for 9 weeks. First time in his career that hasn't played as much rugby as he would like to have played. First time in his career that he's been number 22, 24, 25 in the national setup, which means that it's difficult for him to train like he's out, and it's difficult for him to get all the reps in like he's in. So after the game, when people were asking what happened, what's he looking like? Why does he look so flat? Why doesn't he look like he's finishing off? It wasn't a case of he's lost his mojo. He's injured. He's got slower. That sort of tongue-in-cheek thing is he's probably been at the buffet, and I'll sort out the buffet and make sure he gets back to being his best. I think the narrative of then assuming that he's now, I'm having a go at him and it's because the Springboks and, all that touring. And I just wanted to make sure on the record that 9 weeks for any person to be away, 9 weeks to play, 2 games in 6 weeks, 9 weeks to be in a hotel room, 9 weeks for any athlete. It's work in progress for him, and it's a learning object for him as well to see how he's going to become at his best, because all that happened is, and it's a great attribute for him and it's a great accolade for him. I think everyone expected the situations he was in the game, that we were going to see a little bit more flair and a little bit more excitement. And when we didn't see it, people went, "What's wrong? Has he lost his pace? Is he injured? Is he carrying an hamstring injury? Is he?" And tongue in cheek, I say it again, my job, I've known him since he was 19. I will manage him. It was my diversion to you guys that, if he's been at the buffet, probably that's what he's done. He's eaten takeaway foods a bit, and I'll sort that out. It was never intended to be an attack on the guy or criticism of him as a player or criticism of him being away the box or him not getting trained properly, etc. It was generally just a coach saying to you guys, don't stress, it'll be fine.
Thanks, Jake.
Thank you.
Jake, was it easier this week to prepare for Saracens, seeing that you didn't have to fly all the way to London after that week in Ireland, and also after a good victory in Goa on Saturday?
Yeah, Kobus, I mean, it is easier because we are this side already. Conditions, and I said to the guys, I'm sure I said it to you guys after the game as well, but 4G pitch last week, 4G pitch this week. We don't have 4G pitches in South Africa. We've trained last week and this week on 4G pitches. So there have been a lot of positives that we've got, kept some of the Springboks here, this side, as I earlier mentioned. So Cameron hasn't been home yet. Grobbies hasn't been home yet. He too, those two complete, with Kanan have basically been on tour for 9 weeks. But they're here, they're on this side, they've experienced the cold weather, they've experienced the rain, they've experienced 4G. Wasn't lots of travel in terms of, not flying from South Africa, so probably a bit easier. So yeah, it is one of those weeks where we're probably a little bit more accustomed, a little bit more ready than we would have been if we were training the whole week in the sun and then flying out here, to play in the freezing cold on a 4G pitch.
Jake, what do you expect from Saracens after them losing on Friday against the Falcons?
Look, Kobus, one thing that I think people mustn't forget, in the last 10 years or so, Saracens have been the benchmark with other teams on how to play big games. I said to one of the local journos here, whether you don't understand it, but whether you don't follow it, you will still see that every time they've been expected to win a massive game, every time they've got themselves into a situation where they need to win, they've won the premiership, they've won big games in quarterfinals and semi-finals, they've won European Cups. This club, yes, the personnel's changed a bit, but there's still a definite belief that when they have to play big games, they can win. So last week, I'm sure they'll get a rev, and I'm sure they'll get want to have a reaction after last week's performance. But the one thing that I have warned our players about is Saracens have had the ability in the last 10 years to pull out the stops when the big games come. And that's why it's such a great test for us, because they've lost a couple of their players, but there's still a lot that are still around. The coaching staff still around. The philosophy of the club is still around. So I foresee that obviously last week will give them a bit of a boost in terms of making sure this week they get it right. But I also, there's a different competition, a competition they really played well in. I mean, if you look at the history of this club, when it's come to European Cup rugby, Champions Cup rugby, they've always been there and thereabouts.
Thank you, Jake. All the best.
Thank you.
As a Jake, just on Robbie's being captain, just maybe have a word about that.
Well, a couple of things, Brendan. One is I've always said we need to create leaders in our group. When we started, obviously Marcel was the captain. Slowly but surely, we've added to that leadership group. Ulrich's been the captain. Akker's been the captain. Ruan Nokier's been the captain. Nazam Carr's been the captain. Cornel Hendricks been the captain in the time that we've been together. And Nagala Krobis, is in the leadership group. He's well respected with the players. And it makes sense. The more captains we can produce, the more guys that we can put on the field that understand what we want to do, how the team wants to play, the better it's going to be when they're all available. Who knows? Won't be long before Ruan Nokia, Ulrich Lowe, him, and other guys that have captained the side will be on the field. Marcel might be on the field at the same time. Nazam might be on the field at the same time. And having remembered from the Springboks, when I started, John Smith was the captain, but by the time we got to 2007, Victor had been a captain of a province, Fourie had been a captain of a province, Kalkberger had been a captain of a province, Johan Smith had been a captain of a province, John de Villiers had been a captain of a province. It makes it so much easier when you have all these leaders in and around the group. So it is it's obviously his first time leading out the Bulls, but the players back him. The players look up to him. He's maybe not a guy who talks a lot, but by his actions and by what he does at training and what he does in meetings, I'm sure that he'll be a very good captain.
Jake, then just given, and I know it's not something that you guys, because you guys obviously plan ahead, but given the reaction that you guys got last year with the Northampton game when you sent
Yes.
the other side,
Yes.
do you feel that there's a bit more of a point to prove against Saracens to maybe in this game just to show what you guys can do?
Well, look, we beat Saracens last year, Brennan, and I mean that was for us was a great benchmark of where we were as a group. Now we play them at home on a 4G pitch. I don't think Northampton last year's got anything to do with where we are now as a group. I said to the local journal here when I did a column, one thing that you asked me about that game, one thing that I've learned having coached in this competition and for many years now is you have to have lots of depth if you want to compete. I said it to you guys many times, Brendan. If you want to win this comp, you could possibly have to play Toulouse, La Rochelle, and Leinster in 3 consecutive weekends. Now, that could happen. I mean, the way the draw goes, you could get one in the quarters, one in the semis, one in the finals, Now, is South African franchise, that I'm talking about mine, is South African franchise like the Bulls strong enough to win 3 consecutive games against Leinster, Toulouse, and La Rochelle? I don't think yet. Because we don't have the depth, and I'm talking about the quality depth of guys who've played at this level consistently and week in and week out. One of the things that I've learned and I've seen again, it's reaffirmed this week, when the Boks come back from a month away at international rugby, they come back very different in terms of what the input, how they grow, who they engage with overseas, who they play against, the crowds they play in front of. And then you bring that into your provincial side. And now I can understand. I mean, when Saracens are on fire as they were, they would have had 2/3 of the England side playing for them. the other third probably playing for the other international sides on the autumn window, whether it was Argentina or Scotland or, you know, other teams that were touring. And then you bring all that together, and the energy and the IP and all the sort of added value you get is just it's exponential. It's just so difficult for other teams to catch up. So I'm jumping around a bit, but we've got to get to a point where if you have 55 players contracted to your club, then you've got to have 55 players that are good enough and strong enough and cohesive enough and all those things together to be able to play, because you can't just use 30 players for every game the whole year. So who knows, maybe that game last year against Northampton, where we exposed players to that pressure, where we exposed them to a away game against a team that went on to win the Premiership, maybe those are the sort of building blocks we're going to need for this year's campaign, because we're not going to be able to keep the same 35, 40 guys together every weekend.
I was going to say, following up with that, Jake, just do you get the sense that that the players have grasped more what this competition means in the last year or so, and they're getting to grips with the importance?
Yes, yeah, I do, Brendan. I do, and I think also that also goes with the supporters. You know, let's be fair. Some guys are still asking, why Free State in Amsterdam? They're playing in the EPCR, but why are they in the EPCR? They didn't play URC. We're a rugby country. People ask me that question. People want to know, you know, why we can't host a final or semi-final of Europe. People want to ask, over Christmas, why are you playing another competition when you were last week playing in the URC competition? And my answer to that is we're still very new in how Champions Cup rugby, Investec Champions Cup rugby is. You know, they don't quite understand why some teams this year are playing when they're not that good. I'm talking about in the competition, because they forgot that it was what that team did last year. So the whole football model of going from your local competition into Champions Cup or Europa Cup, as in football, I don't think the South Africans have got that yet, as we didn't get when Super Rugby first started, and then we didn't get when they went into conferences. But in terms of the team, Brendan, I mean, we're fully aware of the Investec Challenge, Champions Cup and Challenge Cup difference, and we're fully aware that the Champions Cup, Investec Champions Cup, playing Saracens in London, is as competitive as any game you're ever going to have played in your life before.
You've made a few changes this weekend from last weekend. Were they forced, or is it just part of building that depth that you've just spoken about and giving the players the opportunity to play at this level, and it's part of your normal rotation?
A little bit of both. And I mean, obviously a guy like Mpilo ruled himself out when he got that red card. But, saying that, I'm going to swap around all the time now. I think one thing you've got to learn, or one thing you've got to try and do, is you can't swap everybody and then you have no cohesion, and you can't keep the same group together all the time either. So between that, we're going to interchange players. Players are no different anywhere in the world. They want to play with the best players. They want to play against the best opposition. They don't only want to hear their name get called out when you're playing, in their eyes, weaker opposition. So it's a little bit of both, a little bit of what I learned last year as well. People ask me, what did you learn from last year's campaign? And we rotated, but I think sometimes we could have rotated a bit more. And I think sometimes I've got to look ahead that you're going to have your strongest possible teams when they're really, and I'm saying the big knockout games come about. I mean, obviously the internal games in the competition that are massive. But if you have your strongest side for the last 3 games of European rugby and your last 3 games of the URC, then you're in a good place. That's what you've got to try and get to, is that you have your best players available for those knockout stages. And it goes without saying, there are 5 Springboks that aren't here. So we don't have Ruan, we don't have Jan Hendrik, we don't have Kurtley, we don't have Ulrich, we don't have Wilco, and then we don't have one of our junior stars, Reinhard Ludwig, here. So probably 6 players that we're missing for this weekend. But as I said to the coaches, we're going to make sure that those 6 guys are going to be in the back end of the competition with this group of players that are getting this exposure.
And then just in terms of the weather, obviously not great, probably similar to last weekend, but you must have gained a lot of confidence the way you guys handled that against Connacht.
And I mean, I don't know if you're aware, if you're following the weather, there's obviously on Sky and BBC, there's a big report about some storm coming into the island, and it's coming over the west of, obviously Wales, and then into London and over Scotland. And, so they apparently give, when the storms come, they give them names, and this one's already got a name. So, for all intents and purposes, I hear tomorrow the winds could go up to 80 miles an hour, rain coming in, parts of Scotland, snow. But that was, obviously, it was a learning thing last week. But I mean, if that is the case, it'll be the first time we've ever played in that sort of condition as well. I mean, we haven't, South Africa, we're not used to conditions like that when there's storms coming through and, warnings about roofs blowing off, etc. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, it looks nice now. Look outside, the sun's shining and everything looks nice, but you know how quickly it can change.
Competing in the URC and the Champions Cup has traditionally been a difficult sort of balancing act for not only you, but South African teams as well. So in the absence of, of getting 55 guys of sort of equal ability and equal cohesion,
Yes.
like
Yes.
you were talking about, what's your sort of learnings been from last year to this year in terms of an approach to competing in the two competitions?
So I'm going to sound like a guy banging the same drum. If I had 55 players, which I do have now, and I had them at the caliber of the 55 that would be available for us if everyone was playing in South Africa, we would be more than competitive in this competition. So, I mean, again, I'm repeating because I spoke to the local journos here, but if I could just bring the Bulls players back that have left, so Ergia Snyman, Andre Pollard, Jesse Creel, all those players that are playing abroad, Andre Liebenberg, then all that happens, the difference between your number 30 and your number 55 just becomes smaller and smaller. Whereas there's not enough games to give the guys between number 30, and I'm using a number, in different teams it varies according to how much depth you have. But let's just say for explanatory purposes, from 30 to 55, that gap for me is the one we've got to try and get closer and closer. And if you look at the really good sides like Toulouse, Leinster, La Rochelle, even Saracens in their heyday, Toulon in their heyday, I mean, they basically had the ability to pick, even number 50, who was a test player, or he might have been a star in the juniors, and he would play with 22 other internationals. That's basically what Investec Champions Cup rugby is about. It's exactly the same competition as international rugby, except the jersey is different. You look at Toulouse, you look at Leinster, when they play games, it's basically like two international sides playing against each other, and whoever's not from that country would generally come as an international player from another country, whether it be Fiji, Tonga, Argentina, Samoa, New Zealand. I mean, that's generally the caliber of. So I hope I'm answering your question. What have I learned? Well, I mean, what I have learned is you've got to get number 30 to 55 closer and closer and closer together. It takes time. It obviously going to take some out-of-the-box thinking from SA Rugby on how do we get to be competitive in the Investec Champions Cup every year, because I think the one has a domino effect on the other one. As I said earlier, bringing Springboks back or bringing internationals back into your club as a massive bonus. I'm sure a winning culture of a team winning all the time. I've got no doubt that Saracens, at the time that they were dominant, must have aided England's development and vice versa. So it's not me saying to you, Sim, we want it one way. I'm almost sure that if this team runs out every week and wins, and whether it's a franchise of South Africa, then it makes it so much better for the national setup, because winning is what it's all about, and winning is obviously like losing, becomes habitual.
Thanks, Runga. Hi, Jake. I'll just have one there. Seeing that you've got, you spoke about the Storms there, and you've got Kanan Moody at outside centre, I guess you're going to run the ball tomorrow.
Well, it depends. If the wind's pumping and there's no way you can pass the ball, we probably won't bring it out of the forwards. But it's not one of those things where I can just move Kanan Moody. I also need to give him chances. I can't only pick him at centre when the sun's shining and we play in an easier game. I'm just trying to think what the answer to that is. I mean, he needs to play centre. This is the game. It's a big game. I want to see him at centre. I think Devon needs needs some game time. He also needs to pick up what he can pick up from Willie. I mean, Willie, is obviously very important for us about how he I want to say coaches, but how he teaches all the guys in the back three about what to look for, when to go, when to stay, what to read into. So, when I can get Kanan 1 week getting some information from Willie, and then I can get Devon 1 week getting it from Willie, and then obviously get Sebastian and a Piwe Dianti to get all the stuff that Willie can teach them. Hopefully all that happens is it just has a domino effect on when Willie's not available and Devon goes to fullback and Kanan's on the wing. Then that combination will also work, Ashfaq. So it's not whether it's pelting down, whether we can't move the ball to the edge, whether it'll be one of those games that Kanan will then have to understand. Then his skill sets that he needs for that day will be different. As I said to you in the beginning of this interview, I really rate Kanan, and that's why I took to heart what happened this week, because it's I don't want him for 1 minute to think I'm protecting him from anybody, because as soon as it's no wow, then people go, but is there something wrong with it? 12 tests, unbeaten for South Africa, incredible talent, been on tour for 9 weeks. I'm repeating myself, eaten takeaways, probably hasn't worked out how he can get the best out of himself living in a hotel for 9 weeks. And when I made a comment about, keep him away from the buffet, that generally wasn't anything close to the way it was conveyed this week.
I was just saying, Jake, last week you played into the wind and really carried the ball well through the middle and out wide. So you can do it, despite what people think, if it's raining and windy, that you can't move the ball.
And also, Ashfaq, it would be wrong of me not to say, people don't talk about Johan Goosen. I'm surprised. I read articles and all the other 10s get mentioned. He made 18 tackles last week. We played into a wind, and we could have been 3 tries up, 4 tries up into the wind. His goal kicking, we got 4 out of 4 to the goals. I just think sometimes we also, maybe it's just the way it is. Maybe it's not the flavor, or maybe there's, people ask me about Kanan and Willie, and they ask me about, all the other players. And I just thought he was also one of those guys who didn't get the credit he deserved last week. We're not used to playing in weather like that, and he was outstanding. And a lot of people will say it's because Willie's there, and that's true, because Willie is. I mean, you can't underplay the fact how important Willie is to our game. But you still need a 10 like him that can have pace, kick, still understands when Willie comes in that he's got to go somewhere else. So it'll be interesting tomorrow again. It was a great opportunity last week to play 4G into a wind against a really good side. First week on tour. This week, second week on tour, really tough conditions, expecting a storm. Saracens, really competitive team that know how to win big games. Lots of international experience. I mean, you guys, I heard Sinti might play, Gonzalez might play. They're both Argentinian players who've beaten South Africa, New Zealand, and Australia this year. So, when you look at the team and you forget that even the guys who aren't from England are Paka internationals with great pedigree, and we don't have that. We've got South Africans, so we've got to rely on the talent and the skills we have tomorrow. And hopefully, as I said, we learned enough last week, Ashfaq, to bring us through this week as well.